Nature surrounds us. Sometimes we pay attention, other times we don't. There are people who embrace nature and work to educate others on why we should all care. Butterflies are a passion project for them, and the trouble is they're being challenged, and that could impact our food supply. On today's show, we'll be joined by the Tampa Bay Butterfly Foundation and hear their passion as to why it's so important to help make a difference for our winged friends. That's coming up next on Bayside. Good morning and welcome to Bayside. I'm your host, Shelley Sanders. We are talking all about the beautiful butterflies that surround us on a daily basis. Perhaps you see them, perhaps you just don't notice, but I am here to tell you, you should, as they say, stop and smell the roses. Stop and look at these beautiful creatures that are surrounding Tampa Bay. Now, the Tampa Bay Butterfly Foundation, perfect person to talk to is the founder and president. Welcome to the show, Anita Camacho.
Well, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and something that we all kind of take for granted, speaking from my own perspective, you know, sometimes I do see them and I'm mystified by them, and then other times it is, you know, you get preoccupied with life, and so thank you for being here to give us this reminder to stop and check them out and really appreciate what they're doing here. And not only do they have a purpose, but they're also really, really beautiful.
Right.
So that said, how did it come to be that you founded the Tampa Bay Butterfly Foundation?
Well, I've been working in conservation for a while. Butterfly gardening was always a passion, along with rose gardening, as you mentioned, smelling the roses. So I've always done both, and I've always kept them separate, and from the time I was pretty young. And as time went on, you know, I learned a little bit more. My mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And when that happened, I didn't understand the disease. I dug in and did a lot of research and found it was linked to toxic pesticide exposure. And so I stopped using toxic pesticides. And without another idea, I did nothing until I could find another solution. And that just really led me down a different road about 30 years ago. So I felt over time I really wanted to do something to make a difference and bring this awareness to people so that they could understand. And if you could save just one more person from this kind of exposure, it would make a difference. Sure. So eliminating pesticides in your garden is one big thing that can happen. You don't want those around your butterflies and your caterpillars because that's going to kill them. So what I did find is butterfly gardens are actually great companion gardens for rose gardening, and the bugs really like the butterfly gardens, so they don't really bother my garden, my rose garden any longer. So it kind of was a really neat side effect in a beneficial way. So
imagine that, Mother Nature having it all
figured it out, right? Yeah, she does know best.
Right. So that's pretty fascinating. I don't know that a lot of people hear that message so much, that these pesticides, not only are they harmful, we've all heard this message and we've all seen, you know, various lawsuit information that is out there, but I don't know that we all hear that it's also toxic to our caterpillars, therefore our winged beauties, the butterflies, right? So that's pretty fascinating. So moving forward, you came to create Tampa Bay Butterfly Foundation.
So I had been going all over the world studying butterflies, visiting butterfly farmers, and doing a lot of things with other butterfly groups. And I came to, you know, looking at Tampa, I thought I really need to find something here locally, see what I can do, boots on the ground locally in Tampa, and I couldn't find anything. So initially I actually started the chapter of NABA because I was already a member of the national group, North American Butterfly Association. So I asked them, I said, hey, you know, really like to get a chapter going here. And so we have a local chapter now, which is covers Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Pasco. And so that was kind of the first step. And that basically that group is focused on butterfly counts and monitoring populations throughout the state of Florida. Okay. So
Now, how does that differ from your foundation?
So there's a pretty big difference. Because they're focused on the butterfly monitoring and the counting and collecting data. So what my foundation is focused on is putting more Florida back into Florida, the native plants that the butterflies need to survive, both nectar and host plants for the caterpillars and nectar for the adults. So we're focused on getting more Florida, put it back into Florida. We're working on more conservation so we have butterflies to count.
Right.
So we're kind of trying to put the habitat back, because when we build a new building, whether it's commercial or residential, the land gets scraped, nothing's left behind. So all those native plants that we're growing there, which many might consider weeds, are very important habitat in many cases. So we're trying to encourage people to plant butterfly gardens, even little pocket gardens, or on a balcony you can put a butterfly garden in a pot if it's not a screen balcony, and they'll fly pretty high to find what they need.
Right. So basically, NABA or NABA works, you guys are sort of symbiotic in so
Right.
much as that you really benefit one another. You, with the foundation, are helping to regenerate a lot of these butterflies, and they just kind of do the data collecting and finding out. It's a great way for you to figure out if your foundation is working, isn't it? With the
Sure.
results from them. I got to think that's excellent feedback.
Well, absolutely. What we do is anytime we plant a site is we do monitor those locations ahead of the planting, so we can get an idea of what's there before we start. And then we start monitoring them after the planting, so we can kind of get an idea of the results that we're seeing and the uptick in the species. And typically, that's what we always have seen an uptick. When you plant what they need, they do continue to thrive.
Sure. Now, I just have to say, it almost makes me chuckle a little bit on counting butterflies. I mean, they're all, I've seen when you have massive amounts of butterflies, it's very impressive, but oh my gosh, I don't know how in the world you'd begin to count all the butterflies. So please explain this process.
That's it. Well, if you're talking about counting monarchs that are migrating, that is much more of a different measurement that they do based on roosting and the trees and hectares. But here locally in the Bay Area, what we're doing is we're going in a certain area that's been counted typically for many years. And we go in a certain pattern, and once you've gone in a certain pattern, you don't backtrack. So if you backtrack, you're not counting the same species again. If you see a new species, of course, that's something you can add on to. But they're typically not going to be in huge numbers in all cases. There are times where they are. Fort DeSoto this year, we had an unusual case of several hundred, what ended up being Western Pygmy Blues, which was quite shocking because Western Pygmy Blues are typically not found in Florida. Eastern Pygmy Blues are native to our state, so we're seeing some things that are kind of coming into our state that are not, that haven't been here in the past.
Not only are we seeing an influx of a lot of different people, now we've also got a lot of different species of butterflies. I
Right.
love it. Everyone's finding out that we live in paradise.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
All right, well, I want to get into the monarchs and a lot more, dive in a lot more, but we do have to take a short break. In the meantime, for you at home, you're looking at the website right there, and it's butterflytampa.com, butterflytampa.com. That's going to give you all the information and then some on anything that Anita and I speak about today as it relates to the Tampa Bay Butterfly Foundation. Why don't you go check it out? It's really pretty interesting. We'll be back. Welcome back to Bayside. I'm your host, Shelley Sanders. We're speaking all about butterflies here in the Tampa Bay area and then some, and we can't do that without talking about the Tampa Bay Butterfly Foundation's founder and president, Anita Camacho. Anita, this is so fascinating. To me, I'm always blown away by nature in particular and just the dynamics of how it's like, wow. Of course, right? So it's all very fascinating, and unfortunately, we as a species of our own, the human species, have done a lot to this planet in both ignorance and otherwise, without any regard to nature. That said, monarch butterflies, perhaps the most famous of all butterflies for sure, recently made the endangered species list. Now, that to me is mind-boggling, because a monarch, I think, initially, to hear that, I think, wow, what? You're kidding me. Why is that? And why is that such a huge bit of information? And why should we care?
Well, why we should care is it's talking about our biodiversity and how the health of our world is going. It hasn't officially been declared endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, but it has been declared with the International Union of Conservation of Nature, which is a big deal to make the red list. There's over 147,000 species that are known, and about 41,000 that are endangered or extinct. So there's a lot that they're following worldwide, and for the monarch to make that, and what has made the list with the IUCN is the migratory monarch. So this is the monarch that actually makes the trip from Mexico to the border of Texas, lays their eggs, and then 3 or 4 generations later, they go in Canada and they say, okay, it's time to go back to Mexico again. And it's a phenomenon that is still being researched by many, many groups. There's a lot of different theories as to how they know, DNA, magnetism, all kinds of different things that it could be, direction of the sun, that tell them to get all the way down to Mexico. So this super monarch, the 4th or 5th generation that makes it to Canada, is flying about 3,000 miles, which for a small insect that's about the weight of a paperclip is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
To make it that far, and by the millions.
Sure.
So, but we have with this eastern migration, which is on our side of the United States, of course, is dropped about 85% or greater in the last 25 to 30 years. That's a pretty significant number. There's a lot of things affecting that. Climate change is a big one. So your average temperature makes a really big deal in how the monarchs are doing. What can happen is when they're overwintering in these Mexico and the Oyamel fir trees, is if the climate is too warm, it'll trigger them to head up north sooner. And what happens is their plants aren't ready for them to lay eggs on. Right. So you've got a disconnect between timing, because the plants haven't been triggered yet, but the butterflies have. So that causes a significant decline in their populations. Also, of course, pesticides, as we mentioned earlier, killing them, and then herbicides killing their plants. They've lost a lot of hectares in Mexico with illegal logging and agriculture, primarily due to agriculture, avocados. So they're really struggling in a lot of different ways. And the best thing we can do is just plant more native plants that they need, their native milkweeds and nectar resources to help them out. That's the best thing. And we do get a fair number of monarchs that come through Florida. Some go through the Panhandle, but some actually come down the coast. Can see them sometimes at Cedar Key, Fort DeSoto around early November, late October, early November, and they'll actually go all the way across the Gulf of Mexico. And they will do stopovers overnight and rest on oil rigs and ships and things, and then continue on the next day. And they pretty much use the jet stream to make the migration, but it's pretty phenomenal.
It is phenomenal, just even hearing of it. And of course, there have been many documentaries about the monarch butterfly, because it is such a feat that it does attempt. So say we've got viewers out there that are thinking, I would love to have monarchs in my backyard and other butterflies. What can they do? Is there something that we could plant? Is there something that we could do to attract more monarchs?
And well, attracting monarchs is probably the easiest thing to do.
Oh, wow.
I have literally been pulling milkweed out at a job site, and within a second or two, a monarch showed up and started laying eggs. If that isn't justification for the work that we're doing, hard to say what is. And I had witnesses, otherwise it probably couldn't even. It wasn't just a monarch, there was also a Gulf fritillary, another butterfly. So they really need habitat, and they'll find it very quickly. Usually, sometimes it might take a month or two, but oftentimes they find you very quick. And when they find you, you will find they're going to eat all the milkweed, and a lot of people panic because they want to feed the caterpillars, so they end up buying more. After a little while, everything starts to level off. Predators show up and kind of keep the balance of, so your plants can make a comeback. But it's pretty easy. So native milkweeds is really what they need, and also nectar resources. And we do have a Florida population that's here year-round. So There's a lot of different theories on that, whether or not that population's really a residential population or whether or not it's monarchs that just couldn't make the journey and got trapped here because of non-native milkweeds that have been planted. So there's some different schools of thought on that, but
And all of this information is on your website as well to help guide, or do you
most
have
of it,
some
but
of
we'll,
it?
we have a lot of it in our education center,
Love that.
which is in Tampa.
All right, well, fantastic. If you're wanting to know where this education center is, or you'd like more information, you can always log on. And of course, you can always give them a call and they can kind of walk you through it too if you've got a question about what to plant. That website is butterflytampa.com, butterflytampa.com. Why don't you check it out, see what you can do to help, and when we come back, we'll talk more about how you can help out. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Bayside. I'm your host, Shelley Sanders. We're continuing this fascinating conversation all about butterflies. They're so beautiful, but they have a purpose. Anita, on the break, we were talking about, my gosh, there's so much information that you could share with us, and we just don't have enough time. My gosh, we'll have to have you back, is my big hint there. So, as it relates to butterflies, I know that maybe someone's just tuning in, or maybe someone's sitting here still thinking like, yeah, they're pretty. Why? Okay, great. You have a foundation. I don't understand.
Why should I care?
Why should I care, honestly, outside of they're beautiful?
Right.
So talk to that individual and tell us what, they have a purpose here.
Absolutely. Well, butterflies are pollinators, and we need pollinators. We want to eat, so if we want to continue to do that, we really need to take care of our pollinators, all of them, and butterflies are one of them. Their decline, and all insect declines, are direct correlation to the health of our environment and what we're doing to that environment, which ultimately we're the top of the food chain. And if it's happening to our little guys at the bottom of the food chain, which are pollinators and other insects, we're the ones being affected. And if anything brought that to light, COVID should have, along with all the other rises in so many other diseases, cancers and autism and ADHD, Alzheimer's, all kinds of neurological disorders. So these are things that are really important to eliminate or extremely just cut back on toxic pesticides. The biggest way I can describe that is if you are spraying a roach with a can of Raid, it's an instant neurological effect. The roach is shaking. We'll call it like Parkinson's, but it's an instant dose. So we're doing this to ourselves a little at a time with all our yards being sprayed and all the chemicals that we're constantly using. And to eliminate those, we give nature a chance so that nature can continue to support us. And that's a really important thing for humankind.
For sure, for sure. So it goes even beyond just the butterfly here, the message there for you at home. So on that same note, how can our viewers help? So if someone is sparked from this and thinking, oh my gosh, well, I'm really going to dive into this more. Maybe this is the first time they're hearing of this information. They stop spraying these horrible chemicals. What else can they do? And how can they help you out? Maybe there's someone new to the area that's like, I really want to do something. I just don't know where to land. Right.
There's just so many options. And a lot of people will say, I don't have a green thumb. And honestly, that's maybe because you're just not planting the right thing in the right place. And native plants belong in Florida, like our sandy soil, so it's really easy. And all our nature interpreters at the facility, they talk you through it. They help you pick plants. So that's one option, is to even start small with a pot of a couple of plants, or put a few things in your garden and just start adding things. So that's one idea. There's a lot of volunteering. We do a lot of conservation work, putting in habitat for the pollinators. So that's something that people can be involved with and learning the plants that way. And of course, financial donations, and you have events throughout the year. You're looking at the website right there, as a matter of fact, and that would be your first step, to log on to butterflytampa.com, check it out. That'll give you some ideas, some tips, also ways that you can volunteer and donate your time, treasure, or talent, any of the above or all. Why don't you check it out while we go to break?
As always, I want to thank you at home for joining us this week on Bayside. And of course, Anita, thank you so much for being here and
Thank you for having
enlightening
me.
us on just the fascinating aspects, things that it's much deeper than just the beauty of a butterfly, but what a great side benefit of them, right? So for you at home, log on to butterflytampa.com. That way, that'll give you information that Anita and I have spoken about. They have events that are fun and beautiful and fascinatingly interesting throughout the year that goes to benefit this wonderful foundation. Perhaps you'd like to volunteer or donate some financial assistance to them. They'll never say no. I encourage you every week to get out and get involved in your community. Start small, like Anita said. Plant a plant and stop spraying chemicals. We'll see you next week.